Hi, everyone. This is Sam Collins, your coding and billing expert for acupuncture and the American Acupuncture Council Insurance Information Network for seminars and coding. I am the person, and I want to speak a little bit today about all of the fervor that's going on with dry needling and what's occurring and where we're at, what's the state. I think I want to put a little perspective for us, though, to see whether or not are we getting too excited or getting too worked up. Let's start first with, as a licensed acupuncturist, can an acupuncturist perform physical medicine services? And of course, the answer is yes. There's a little variation from state to state, but for the most part, an acupuncturist can do all types of physical therapy services, including heat, including body work, electrical therapies, exercise, and so on. In many ways, I would say there's not much that a physical therapist can do as far as a therapy that most acupuncturists cannot do as well. With that perspective, I would ask, think of how much training an acupuncturist gets in those services. And I would say it's probably anywhere from a few hundred hours. And so certainly it's not unreasonable to do them. Some of them are pretty simple services, such as placing a hot pack on someone or doing some deep tissue work that might take a little more experience. However, I think I want to put perspective on this to kind of get with, what is this dry needling thing? Well, dry needling, of course, as I see it, frankly, is a form of acupuncture, but it's just a different term. They're not doing it with the same principles, but at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. So if you think of it, if someone inserts a needle to a trigger point, that's still an acupuncture point. It's still working on it somehow, but of course, in this case, they're saying it's working on a trigger point or muscle. So you'll hear the term intramuscular therapy. So now the issue is going to be, for me, has acupuncture made a headway into physical therapy by virtue of being able to do physical therapy? Think along this protocol as well. A chiropractor, for that matter, an athletic trainer, can do physical therapy services well under their scope. That doesn't change their primary care. So even with an acupuncturist or a physical therapist doing dry needling, will it still really change their primary method of care? And so that's an issue that I think we need to address and wonder, is this really going to make as much difference? Frankly, I think a lot aren't going to be interested in doing it, not to say some aren't, but I think a lot won't necessarily be as interested in doing it as we may think, because they're still going to fall to their basic principles. So here, let's go to the slides and talk about what is dry needling. So if we take a look here at the slide, you'll see here there's one that says dry needling. You'll see this measurement of some trigger points along the legs, and it shows some points where obviously someone's going to insert into a trigger point. So in this little slide here, you'll notice here is some muscle fibers, and then they're showing within that a contraction or not, or hence trigger points, or if you will, some people just say knots. You'll see this picture, and of course this picture shows a needle being inserted. It looks a little aggressive to me, to be honest, but they're obviously putting a lot of pressure to it. But the one thing I've learned in teaching acupuncture coding and billing, acupuncture needles, when inserted to a muscle, will decrease muscle spasm. So of course, when a physical therapist or anyone inserts a needle to this trigger point, it is definitely going to reduce muscle spasm. Now, here's my issue when you speak of acupuncture, though. Acupuncture is different because you're working on a series of points of causation. I would think of it in these terms. Does a trigger point always mean the cause is the trigger point? In other words, if you get rid of the trigger point, if it doesn't deal with the overall causation, it's probably not going to reduce and simply return. Much like I think if you were to sit in a hot tub, you can reduce muscle spasm, but if you don't correct what's causing the muscle spasm, it's simply going to come back. So in this sense, I want us to think along the lines of, is this going to be as effective as they think? I'm certain it's going to be somewhat effective, but not like acupuncture. So my main point to you is continue to make sure that people see how good acupuncture is. And in fact, I think this may be a small blessing, because of course, if this starts to show efficacy, all the more it shows how good acupuncture is. Now let's deal specifically. Oh, I'm having a problem moving my slides here, so give me a second to redo. Oh, there we go. Here is what physical therapists put as the major trigger points in the body, and they're showing these areas. In my opinion, then, this is likely the areas where they would more or less probably insert their quote-unquote dry needles. Now, again, you'll notice they're very generic and therefore not dealing with an area specifically. However, I would still think you still have to palpate the trigger point, decide whether or not to treat it, and certainly this could be something that's a positive, but this certainly doesn't deal with the underlying cause. Now, that being said, there are states that, regardless of what's upcoming to us, that do not allow physical therapy to be doing any type of dry needling whatsoever. They don't have the licensure to pierce the skin. So you can see here, there are 5 states that just say absolutely not. So California, Hawaii, Idaho, New York, and Utah. That's not a very big group because, of course, if there's only 5 states that do not, that means there are 45 states that do. Now, how does this affect us? Well, certainly in those states, they could have already been doing it. So let's deal with, are we getting too excited on something where it's already being done or has been done? And is it really making a headway? Now, of course, if there's a code, there may be a little bit more to it. Maybe they'll start some billing. But frankly, in most states that are doing dry needling, they're already billing for it. So I'm not sure we're going to see much more of it happening. And in fact, the only person that can do the dry needling, just like with acupuncture, would be the physical therapist. A physical therapist can insert needles for the purpose of treating pain, so-called dry needling, but there's no board that allows their assistant to do so. So this is something that has to be done hands-on by the physical therapist, which, as you may not be aware, a lot of the therapies that occur in a physical therapy office is often supervised by a staff person under the supervision, of course, and done recognized and done correctly. But again, not this service. So again, this requires a much more hands-on approach by the physical therapist, and whether or not they're going to spend the time or doing that. Let's bear in mind the creation of a code this coming year. Is it going to change what's already been occurring if 45 states been able to do it? Now, what about chiropractors? Frankly, chiropractors have been doing a lot of quote unquote chiropractic acupuncture or dry needling, except for these 16 states. So the 16 states in front of you do not allow it and won't be allowing it next year unless these states were to change their laws. Otherwise, in these states, they have to simply become an acupuncturist in order to do so. However, if there are 16 states that don't allow it, that means there are 34 that do. And I think it's kind of interesting to see what these states require. Now, you'll notice in Alabama, Arkansas, a lot of them have just hours, anywhere from 100 to 300. Notice some of them have here where it says plus NBC exam. That's the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners examination. And in most states, it requires additional training. Well, if you think of it, don't acupuncturists require additional training to do therapies? Grant you, we don't do a lot of them per se, but certainly could be an adjunct of what you do. So here's the states on this page. Here's another state. You'll notice continuing on that most are about 100 hours. So frankly, if dry needling were exceptionally popular, wouldn't we see many more of these states doing it already? I think we would. Therefore, I don't think they've embraced it as much. And it's not to say that they may not if there's a code, but there already is. In these states, if they were doing this service, they actually could bill acupuncture. And clearly we see it's not that popular because with 100 hours of training, let's face it, is that doing acupuncture? I don't think you could learn in 100 hours, a thumbnail of what's really required to really treat based on meridians and the protocols of traditional medicine. So again, I'm highlighting this to kind of say, let's take a step back. Let's take a look at how this progresses and whether or not these providers are going to use acupuncture or dry needling as part of their course. And even for those that do, I think we may see that it may be a benefit to us because it's going to demonstrate that it does work. And maybe it's better to get the real expert. So I see a marketing opportunity. I would want to advertise, don't get quasi-acupuncture, get the real thing. Come to a person who's really been trained to really understand how it works instead of a person who's taken a weekend course. Much will be the same. I'm a doctor of chiropractic. And as a consequence, I did get physical therapy training as part of my education. But frankly, it was 120 hours. And in 120 hours, in truth, I didn't learn that much about physical therapy, the rudiments. Clearly, there's a lot more that has to occur in order to do it really effectively. That being said, I think we want to sit back, kind of look to see where we're moving. And here would be the big picture for me. Could an acupuncturist, should they choose, do some techniques that would be dry needling instead of acupuncture? I would argue that's up to the acupuncturist. There could be a time instead of doing acupuncture, you could do dry needling because you're simply inserting to a muscle trigger point, but likely doing some other areas as well. So frankly, I think you could do part of the visit as acupuncture, part of the visit is dry needling, if you will. Certainly not outside of the scope. It's certainly something to consider because I think there's a bright future, particularly with the dry needling and the reduction of pain that they're supposedly seeing. How much better is it when an acupuncture does it? So again, to keep perspective, Keep an eye out. We're certainly there for you to look to see what's happening when the code becomes. We're going to be making sure that the profession understands it, understands our role, how we want to make sure to put our position to make sure there's a clear difference among not only the professions, but more importantly, the public. The American Acupuncture Council, the network who I work with in the seminars, we're there to help. Take a look at us on Facebook. We report a weekly show on questions and answers, but we're here to help. So if you have any questions, have any issues, don't be afraid to reach out to us to say, hey, what's going on? What's new? We'll be there for you now. We're going to be there after the first of the year. We're here for you. And I'd say, let's move forward. And certainly this may be something that's going to be a benefit more than a detriment. Next week's program is going to have Pony Chang. We're excited to always have her. Thank you for spending some time. I'll see you next time. This is Sam from the American Acupuncture Council Network.